This is a special bonus episode of the Everything is a Primary Source podcast, the show where popular culture is looked at to learn about history. I'm your host, Eric Paul. We're celebrating Independence Day with a pair of interviews with some young historians that were recorded last year at Exeter, New Hampshire's Independence Day festivities at the American Independence Museum.
Daddy, we stopped watching that
So
before
I am here with Logan and Leah, right? And he's also, we're going to have people jumping on all the time here. We're at the American Independence Museum in Exeter, New Hampshire for their annual, 33rd annual American Independence Day celebration. And I brought a DVD copy, I'm so glad you pointed this out, a DVD copy of Liberty's Kids from PBS. And you watched this when you were,
Yeah.
do you still watch it
little.
now?
No, we don't watch it anymore.
We can't
but we
find
watched it
it.
a lot when we were little.
Yeah. What did you like about the show?
I liked that we were learning all the things that were happening in the show, and that it also made it interesting and kid-friendly.
Yeah.
And I liked that they made history, but it was real history, but it was for kids, and it was like a cartoon and not.
You know, so for people listening that might never have watched the show, basically it's about kids, probably about your age, right, that basically go through the entire ordeal of the American Revolutionary War from beginning to end. And so there's a lot of topics in that time period that are not necessarily easy to talk to kids about, but they did a pretty good job on that show, I always thought, didn't they? And star-studded.
Make it too scary and stuff.
Right, yeah. It wasn't like crazy violent or anything like that. But pretty star-studded cast.
Yeah.
I remember Ben Stiller, for some reason, was Thomas Jefferson. Arnold Schwarzenegger did the voice of Baron von Steuben. And here it says, featuring Walter Cronkite as Ben Franklin. So here's my question for you today. Who do you think the intended audience, not necessarily of the show, but of this DVD copy, who do you think this DVD was made for?
I don't know.
Because most little kids, they might be able to operate a DVD player. It's kind of an artifact in its own right nowadays.
Yeah.
But
It's like simplified history for grown-ups.
well, so here's where I'm going with it. Walter Cronkite. Do you know a single kid who's like, oh, that has Walter Cronkite in it? I gotta get that.
No.
But who do you think would say, oh, Walter Cronkite's in it?
The parents.
Parents or grandparents, right? People who see and recognize the old newsman, right, as the voice, the stable voice of, and so you might remember on Liberty's Kids, he was like kind of the narrator of it as Ben Franklin. So it kind of, so the show itself is for kids.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because in that time period, there was kind of a deficit of this kind of history. It was kind of overlooked a little bit. But then the way they're advertising this, it's like, so featuring the voices of, here it is, look at this. Annette Bening, Warren Buffett, Aaron Carter. Do you know Aaron Carter is? I think he was in NSYNC, one of the boy bands from that time period. 'Cause this is the early 2000s. Walter Cronkite, Billy Crystal, Michael Douglas, Don Francisco, Whoopi Goldberg was in it. Kayla Hinkle, Dustin Hoffman, Yolanda King, Liam Neeson, Arnold Schwarzenegger, General Norman Schwarzkopf, Maria Shriver, Arnold Schwarzenegger's wife, Sylvester Stallone, Ben Stiller, and Michael York. So it was like basically taking a walk down the movie rental aisle, which I'm sure you're not familiar with that, and getting it onto one DVD form. So this was made in early 2000s. So what does all of this tell you about the early 2000s?
I think it tells us that
What were kids? I mean, you're a kid, so how do you prefer to learn about history? What are some of the ways that you
reading some book. I like reading books. I do like watching some TV shows that aren't like
I like
meant
learning
for kids that are like 2 years old.
My favorite way is learning through music.
Music. And
Music. I like learning through books best.
by learning through music, do you mean music from a time period or music about a time period?
Well, I like both. I think music from a time period can tell us a lot about what was going on in that time
Absolutely.
period. And then music about the time period is more like
It's less
what
common.
exactly was
Yeah.
going
And
on.
I like reading books because they have that beautiful language
Yeah.
that we don't really use these days. And it tells you a short sentence stretched out into a long sentence and using beautiful words and beautiful things.
Well, I'm going to turn to Dad, so you're doing a great job, by the way, because
It falls on their mom for
this
sure.
is
Mother is
fantastic to hear.
wonderful
So
education.
back in 2004, of course, we still had books and we had
Yeah.
music,
Yeah.
but
Not the radio, and you couldn't just drive to your local bookstore.
oh, you could. I mean, Barnes and Noble was huge, and the internet was taken off pretty well by 2004. So PBS, which made this, had a lot to compete with.
Yeah.
You know, kids, getting them interested and excited about history, particularly the Revolutionary War era, was a tall order with all the distractions that they had and all the different ways to teach it and stuff. So obviously more enjoyable if you have a little bit of background already. So if
Yeah.
you're reading the books and listening to the music, you can enjoy it that much more.
Much more.
But PBS has long been the, you know, they're a product of the 60s.
Yeah.
Is when the public broadcasting system came about, and you know, so and they really came into their own in the 1970s. That's when, you know, PBS became you know, kind of the go-to for educational television was in that time period. So by 2004, yes, they're at the top of their, you know, stack when it comes to educational programming.
Yeah.
But they still have like Nickelodeon to compete with.
Yeah.
They have to compete with Disney Channel. They have to. So
Yeah.
let's make a cartoon, and the kids will be interested because it's a cartoon.
Yeah.
Their parents will approve because it's not just thrown together. We got
Yeah.
some big names involved in this, and so that tells you quite a bit about the time period, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. A lot.
So, what's your favorite episode of this show? Do you remember it that closely that you can tell me what's your favorite episode?
I forget which one it was exactly, but I really liked the one with the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
That was definitely my favorite. Because at the time I liked louder TV shows, and there was definitely a lot of running around and yelling in that episode.
It matched up pretty well with all those similar programs of the time period.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, I haven't watched it in a long time, but my favorite was the Battle of Saratoga, I thought. I'm pretty sure.
That was. Have you ever been to Saratoga, the actual battlefield?
Yes, we did.
Isn't that? It's neat because it's actually nowhere near the actual downtown Saratoga. That whole area has so many different layers of history.
Yeah, very.
Particularly the
All
hotels
the-
and everything there. But the battlefield, when I was about your age, before I ever went there, I pictured the battlefield in Saratoga being like in the middle of town,
Oh, yeah.
and just like a field or something, you know, like a big
It's like
park.
way out of town.
Yeah, it's like a 40-minute drive,
Yeah.
you know, to get there. But super interesting when you do get there because that was a long battle too. It was several
Yeah.
days, and
Yeah.
so
I can't imagine how anyone fought that war.
it was.
Or any war, to be
yeah,
fair.
but particularly that time period.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw the encampment, and
Yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't have like air conditioning
no, nothing like that at
or
all.
heat
And
or electricity or washers or dryers or bug repellent or
I really liked that about Liberty's Kids, that they
Yeah.
didn't go the direction, because it could have been very easy for them to have like a time traveler.
yeah.
You know, take a kid from the 21st century and have them go through time and visit the 1770s, but they
Yeah.
didn't do that.
Yeah.
They showed kids as
As
you
they
know,
would have been.
right. I mean, there was still, you know, 21st century language in there, and the kids acted a bit more modern than they would have, but
Yeah. Maybe
they were
looked a
still
bit cleaner.
kids from the era.
Yeah.
Right. So it was like they just immersed you into it as best a cartoon
Yeah.
for kids could do.
That's a very beautiful story, and
I used to watch this show when I was in college, when I was studying to be a history teacher.
yeah.
It came on every day at like 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I would
On lunch
finish
break.
with my student teaching. I would go get my supper from the dining hall, and then go to my dorm room in time with so I got it to go, so I could
yeah.
eat my grilled cheese sandwich and watch Liberty's Kids.
Yeah.
And the reason I
That's
picked up the
fun.
DVD a couple years later is I'm like, this is a great teaching tool.
Yeah.
Especially if you're teaching like middle school age kids and stuff, because
Yeah.
it's appealing
Yeah.
to them.
We loved that show.
I'm so glad that you picked it out, and I'm so glad you stopped by and say hi.
Yeah, me too.
So this is definitely a lot of fun. And what else do you expect to do here today at the American Independence Museum?
Well, there's this scavenger hunt where you get a bunch of chains that all have a little bit of history of a bunch of states, and you collect 11 and then bring it to the gift shop here and you get a prize. So we're trying to do that.
You should have considering how much both of you know about history, you should have absolutely no trouble solving that
Yeah.
puzzle at all. You can easily take a 15-minute break
Yeah.
to talk to a podcast guy and then go back to it and still win.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I wish you luck.
Thanks.
All right, I think that's enough school for a summer day, right?
Oh, we love school. It's best.
Awesome. I love hearing that. Have a great rest of your day, guys.
All right, you too.
Admittedly, that last bit about me eating my grilled cheese sandwich and watching Liberty's Kids paints a pretty sad picture of yours truly. But don't worry, I turned things around. Anyhow, here's another segment from that day. This one with a return podcast karaoke participant. Take a listen.
All right, so I have a Everything is a Primary Source podcast first here for the podcast karaoke, that is, in that I have a return guest. So Micah is here, and the last time we spoke was probably about a year and change ago over at the Children's Museum in Dover. But today we're at the American Independence Museum in Exeter. How are things going today? You liking what you see and hear and everything?
Yes.
What's your favorite thing so far besides this podcast?
I like the children's tent.
Yeah. What do they have going on over there?
They read a book,
Oh,
and there was fun like activities over there that you could do. Yeah, and I played the drums over there.
Oh, nice. So you
Yeah.
got the whole setup. I may have heard you actually.
Yeah.
So I went through my house over the last couple of days, and I found everything that was related to Independence Day, to the Revolutionary War, and everything. And I found that's a beer tray that's made by the Miller Company, and it came from 1992. When I first saw it, I thought it was actually a little bit older than that, but it comes from just about 30 years ago. And it came from a series. So I guess I wouldn't have chosen the name that they did for the series, called the Birth of a Nation series, because of the film has the same name. But the Birth of a Nation series came out in 1992, and I assume they had everything from the Declaration of Independence being signed all the way through to other moments in American history that shaped the country. In fact, if you flip it over, they explain why they made it. Now, I guess the question I'll choose to ask you today about this one is, what do you think the intended use of this was? So I keep mentioning that it's like a server type tray, but considering all of the images on it, do you think that it was actually intended to be used that way, or was it more of a decoration?
I think it was more of like a picture, like to put on like to show people that like the day that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, like, where do you think you would find this more? Like in a house, or in a restaurant, or a bar, or something?
You could find it probably in a restaurant or in your house, probably.
Because in 1992, which is, I assume, when this came out, people were. What is that? I guess what does that idea that this would be used for decoration tell you about the people, the country, as of 30 years ago?
Well,
that they might want to have something like this.
Well, they want Well, they want you to they want to show you, they want to show you that when the day happens, so you can remember it.
Do you think it's kind of weird that Miller, a beer company, would be interested in doing that, or does that seem?
I think it seems kind of weird to me. Like a beer company would have this.
Yeah. Now, Miller, I think, is from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so not part of. They're not from the East Coast, which a lot of times 4th of July, Independence Day, early American history is all because that scene took place in Philadelphia, and we're celebrating the document's arrival in New Hampshire in that time period. So, and I find for some reason 1992 just seems like a random year because a lot of the other stuff that I have came from the 1970s, which makes sense because that's the bicentennial. 1976 is 200 years. 1992 just seems kind of random year. Do you know of anything else that happened around 1992? Maybe Dad can help with that. What was going on?
Well, there was kind of a war for freedom.
In 92? We had just gotten through a war. That's true.
Yeah.
There was the Gulf War. Operation Desert Storm had just happened the year before. So there was a huge, and Dad probably remembers this, and Mom too, there was a huge outpouring of patriotism before, during, and following the Gulf War. So there was, I remember that Lee Greenwood song that is actually from the 80s called I'm Proud to Be an American, was super popular. People were tying yellow ribbons around trees and on their houses because that was a sign for supporting the troops and hoping that they come home safely from overseas. And a lot of that had to do with kind of making up for and healing after the Vietnam War, which coincidentally had ended just before the bicentennial. So the bicentennial in 76 kind of did its job of reevaluating American history and making people a little bit closer to being more patriotic. The 80s was a time of huge American patriotism. So that's why I'm actually surprised this thing didn't come from the 80s, because you would think, and do you ever play with G.I. Joe toys?
Oh, yeah, I do sometimes. Yeah.
Because those went away during Vietnam. The company stopped making it because war toys just weren't popular. But then when Ronald Reagan became president, that's when, and he started putting more attention towards the military and everything, those toys came back. And that's when they became super popular. So this, I think, is kind of attached to that. I gotta feel like this idea for Miller to say, all right, let's get on board with this idea of celebrating Americanism, celebrating the country's history. It seems like a kind of an odd choice, but I think everybody was doing that in those days. What else from my table catches your eye, or do you think is similar, was made for a similar reason as what you have there?
Well, there's something that does catches my eye, which is this.
Oh, the Johnny Cash album? So he actually, have you ever listened to that album?
No.
I have some. I've been listening to this for a long time. Has anybody else here ever listened to Johnny Cash's America? It's cool because he goes through it. It's the history of the country through spoken word and song. So he goes from the opening to Paul Revere, that's the first song, which is about Lexington and Concord, and then goes all the way through to the early 20th century. And what's interesting about this, it was made in the 1970s, that's true, but actually before the bicentennial. Because in 1976, everybody was doing patriotic stuff and American history stuff because it was the bicentennial. And it was like, oh, we kind of have to do it. He did this, if I'm not mistaken, I think, 1972. And he actually recorded it for one of the last Apollo moon missions to listen to. So they had nothing else to do. They might as well listen to an album while they're flying into outer space, into, to the moon. And so that do you listen to Johnny Cash music other than?
No. I listen to other music.
Okay. My son loves Johnny Cash, and his name is actually John, in part because of Johnny Cash. But Johnny Cash, I think, is probably one of the best examples of true American music, right? Like he's, he was never, you couldn't really place him on a political spectrum necessarily. He's kind of all over the place on that on purpose, but his music, especially this album, celebrates like probably the most like just ordinary Americans kind of thing. Going back to the one that you chose, similar there. I feel kind of odd talking to somebody your age about beer, but the Miller Beer Company is not the high end, kind of thing. It's enjoyed by ordinary Americans. So to have a very ordinary American scene like that depicted on their tray is not outlandish. They didn't choose have you ever logged on to Google and it has a picture of somebody and it's somebody you've never heard of's birthday, and the idea is that you'll click on it and learn a little bit more about that person. You've had that happen before. Why do you think that they do that?
I don't know.
It's probably just to expose people to people that they've never heard of and learn a little bit more about them.
So,
This is kind of the opposite of that, where it's okay, everybody knows this, but it never hurts to find out more. Have you ever seen a similar image of that's not the Declaration of Independence being signed?
No, not really.
I would suggest that when you get, you can use Google for this, look up images of the Constitution being signed, because the Constitution arrived about 12 years later than the Declaration of Independence. It was written in the exact same building that the Declaration of Independence was, by a lot of the same people. But it's probably a more important document than the Declaration of Independence, because it basically takes all of the ideas of the Declaration and puts it as telling the government what it can and cannot do. Images of that look a lot the same, almost identical, and sometimes people confuse the two. But if you Google, paintings of the U.S. Constitution being signed, you end up with exactly what I do on this podcast, which is to use them as history of their own time period. So just like this is a document of 1992, you can get all the paintings from about 200 years of American history, and it will tell you something about that time period through the painting that came from it.
Yeah, but I do have a book about the writing of independence at my house.
Yeah?
Yeah.
When you go home and look at that book, I want you to look up when it was printed, because that will tell. Then you can look at it the same way I do for this show, as a document not of 1776, but whenever that was written, because it's the same story, just told differently depending on the time period. I have all these books over here. These 3 books came from about 40 years worth of time. Each one is a little bit different in the way that they tell that same story. And that Miller tray also does something, it tells the 1992 version of it. So, Micah, I'm so glad that you found me again, and hopefully this isn't the last time. And until about next year, when we do one again, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Don't forget, you can add your ideas to these short podcasts by visiting the classroom section of everything-history.com and finding the entries in the appropriate archive category. Also, be sure to follow Everything as a Primary Source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. The new season of Your Reactions and Relationships to Popular Culture will be airing soon. Until then, this is the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.